And you'll see, you just wait once. All right, people are starting to come in now.
Matt, I think we can go ahead and get started.
Okay. Good morning, LIBOR family. I hope this message finds you all safe and healthy. We want to let you know LIBOR cares. LIBOR cares about you. LIBOR cares about your family. LIBOR cares about your communities. And LIBOR cares about your business. We've been working hard behind the scenes to bring you up-to-date information on COVID-19, and we are here for you. And with that, I will introduce our Chief Executive Officer, Tessa Holtz. Tessa?
Thank you, Mr. President. LIBOR wants to make it easy for you to stay up to date with the information you need for your health and business. We've even made it easy for you to find with a very simple website, lirealtor.com/COVID. When you follow that link, you get to the COVID Information Hub from LIBOR. You'll find all the information and resources you need, including, importantly, there is already a link to today's slideshow up on that site. And a little bit later today, we will have a link to the whole recording for you. We also have information on filing for pandemic unemployment assistance, the Small Business Administration resources, including the PPL and EIDL applications. And most importantly, in the upper right-hand corner, you will find a sign up for emails and text alerts from LIBOR so that you can always stay up to date on the latest news and information you need. But first, let's get into the presentation. I get the pleasure of introducing Associate Corporate Counsel, Patrick Fife. Patrick is a graduate of Hofstra Law School and has been an attorney for 16 years. And I'm also introducing Corporate Counsel, Doreen Spagnuolo. Doreen is a graduate of St. John's, and it says here that she has been an attorney, quote, longer than that. So Patrick and Doreen, thank you for joining us, and take it away.
Thanks.
Okay, hi, thank you, everyone. Okay, I mean, how exciting is this that I get to meet you in this forum? You know, I'm hoping that we're able to answer all of your questions today, or most of your questions in any event, and I want to thank you so much for tuning in. You know, I want to talk to you about what does essential business mean, basically. You've been hearing essential business, and the ESD, or the Empire State Development Agency, has been given the authority from the governor to determine what businesses will be deemed essential and what that means and what the businesses can do. If a business is deemed essential, that means they can conduct their business with person-to-person contact, as long as they meet the other protocols where they have social distancing protocols, where they wear protective gear protocols, and any other safe protocols. But the ESD has also been given the authority to make guidelines in regard to what an essential business can and cannot do. Now, there's been a bit of, a flux on what the ESD has been determining as it relates to the real estate business. So at first, when the ESD guidelines came out, they had advised that real estate services were not essential. Then that changed a couple of weeks after that initial guidance, and the ESD then came out and said, well, certain services of real estate will be deemed essential. Now, on April 9th, the ESD came out with their most current guideline, which stated real estate services are deemed to be an essential business. However, there are severe restrictions in regards to what a real estate business can and cannot do. And if you take a look at the screen, this is the exact wording for the new guideline, the new mandate, which indicates that real estate services shall be conducted remotely for all transactions. Now, shall, that word means must, right? So real estate must be conducted remotely for all transactions. And what types of transactions? They're saying it includes remote transactions for title search. Appraisals must be conducted remotely. Permits must be conducted, right? Inspections must be conducted remotely. And they say that no in-person contact can be made unless it is legally necessary. Now, the concern with this particular guidance, right, is that the ESD did not come out and define exactly what do they mean by legally necessary. Now, you can put 10 people in a room. You could get 10 different opinions on what is legally necessary. You could get 10 attorneys in a room and get 10 completely different opinions on what they believe is legally necessary. But we don't have guidance. You could just go back to the other slide. We don't have exact guidance or a definition from the ESD that tells us what they mean by legally necessary. They also do not give us a definition for remote, and we'll get into that a little bit later. One thing, if you notice on the end of this guidance, however, they do specifically state that no brokerage or branch office can be open to the general public. So one thing that we do know specifically is that there can be no in-person contact, right, with a member of the public. The ESD clearly said all business, real estate related, must be conducted remotely. The next slide, please. So I would like to go through a number of questions that we've been receiving. The most common questions that the members have been trying to get, have been getting in touch with us and asking, well, what can we do and what can't we do? And one of the things is, can you take a listing? You still can take a listing, but you have to do it without person-to-person contact. So how do you do that? So take virtual listing appointments. And you say, well, how are we going to go about? How are we going to go about doing that? Well, there are many webinars that are out there that teach you how you can do your business in a virtual manner. And something like this, taking a virtual listing, you could always get your client, the seller, to sign the documents electronically. If you don't want to go that route, you can also send the documents, mail them to the client, have them sign it, and then send the documents back to you. you can have contact with the client to take the listing, something like this, to the Zoom or one of these virtual type, live forums, right? Formats where you can speak one-on-one and have a live conversation with your client and go through all of the documents and take the listing that way. Now, what about in-person showings? According to the latest guidance, you cannot have in-person showings, but you can do a virtual showing of the property if the seller agrees. Now, NYSAR's position is that if the licensee is able to go to a house to conduct a virtual showing of the property, if the homeowner leaves, is not present during that showing, and if the agent uses all of the protective protocols, such as disinfecting, wearing protective gear. Now, NYSAR advised that they based their position on a conversation that they had with an attorney from the ESD. And that attorney advised them that this was permissible. However, the ESD also said that they were going to provide NYSAR with other guidance and guidelines in regard to what the agents can and cannot do. And they would include certain things like this on this written guidance. But the ESD has not provided anything in writing at this point in time, which leads me to have to caution you and to tell you, since the only thing we have right now in front of us is the April 9th ESD guidance, we have to go back to that and look at the four corners of that and follow that guidance if you want to be safe. And you don't want the ESD coming back and saying that you did something that you weren't supposed to do. As an agent, if you violate the guidance, you can be sanctioned. And Patrick is going to get into that a little bit later. So to be safe, you should follow the wording of the guidance as it is right now until we get further written guidance from the ESD telling the agents what specifically they can and cannot do. Can you conduct an open house? You cannot conduct an open house, an in-person open house. That would be a gathering of people coming to the open house, and that we know is clearly a violation of the guidelines. But can you conduct an open house virtually by live stream? I would say that you can. And you know, how would you do that? I guess there would be a couple of ways you can do that. And I know that the realtors out there are very creative in coming up with different ways that they can do things. And I know you'll come up with creative ways and figure out how you can live stream, perhaps if you wanted to, an open house without there being any person-to-person contact. So one way could be where the seller is actually in their own home, and they could use a service such as this, where there's a live stream and goes from room to room, showing the different areas of the house. And you, as the agent, could be speaking about all of the different wonderful assets in that room. And you could have other people listening in, potential buyers, and watching as the homeowner goes through each room, but yet it's all done virtually and there's no person-to-person contact. That's just an idea. Now, what about unaccompanied showings? Can a licensee schedule a showing between the potential purchaser and the seller at the seller's home? Now, if you look at, once again, the guidance, the most latest guidance from the ESD, licensees should not be involved in coordinating showings between the buyer and the seller. And why is that? Because if the licensee coordinates such a showing, it is creating person-to-person contact, right? Contact between the buyer and the seller. Now, if the seller wants the buyer to see the property, right, the licensee shouldn't be involved in it at all. But NYSAR's position is that if the seller wants the licensee to provide the buyer with the seller's phone number, the licensee should or could provide it. I caution you, however, there is nothing in writing from the ESD stating that that is permissible. And if you go back to the recent guidance that we have, it says there can be no in-person showing. Every real estate transaction or activity must be done remotely. You have to, so if you do this and provide the information to the buyer and the seller for them to make the arrangements, you could be putting yourself at risk for the ESD coming and saying that you violated the most recent guidance that they had because you put two people together for person-to-person contact. So you have to be careful with making decisions such as this. Another question that has come up frequently is whether or not a licensee can let an appraiser into the premises. Now, NYSAR's position is that a licensee can go to the homeowner, open up the door for the appraiser to go in, as long as the person-to-person contact is limited. I caution you on this, however. If you look specifically, once again, I have to keep going back to the most recent guidance. And in there, it specifically states that real estate services must be conducted remotely, including appraisals. So if you look at the specific language that we have here for the guidance, there could be an allegation that an agent, by going to the home and letting the appraiser in, has breached or breached this guidance. And you don't want to put yourself into a situation where you could be potentially sanctioned by the ESD for violating what the guidance is right now. Appraisals can, however, be conducted remotely. The same issues and the same questions come up in regard to a home inspector. Can the licensee let a home inspector into the premises? NYSAR's position is that the licensee can let the homeowner into the property as long as person-to-person contact is minimized. Once again, if you go back and you look at the guidance from the ESD, they also specifically mention inspector. And it says that it should be, even a home inspection should also be conducted remotely. So by allowing the home inspector into the premises, you could potentially be placing yourself at risk for violating the order. The safest course that you can do is to follow the wording of the order as we have it now until the ESD, and if the ESD provides more specifics on what can and cannot be done. Next slide, please. Okay, now at this point in time, I'm going to turn it over to Patrick. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Doreen, and hello, everybody. I'm going to pick up where Doreen left off and just go through some more questions that relate to activities that realtors can and cannot perform given the ESD's most recent guidance. And the next question that's come up frequently is whether a licensee can enter a vacant home. NYSAR's current guidance is yes, provided there's no in-person contact, that you have the knowledge and informed consent of the seller, and that you follow the appropriate cleaning and disinfecting protocols. And that, again, if the property is not vacant upon arrival, that you are going to cease any activity there. But as Doreen just cautioned, based on that April 9th ESD guidance, we don't have a definition of what remote is. We don't have a definition of what is legally necessary. So there is some risk in, without any further guidance from ESD, even entering a vacant home. we've talked this over with other attorneys across the state, and although you're not having in-person contact, there could be contact with the doorknob. There could be contact with surfaces within that house, and potentially there could be some kind of transmission of COVID through that, which could create potential liability, which is something that we'll get into further. One thing that NYSAR strongly advises against is the arranging of any third parties to enter the house, such as photographers and videographers. They have not been deemed essential in any of the guidance, so that is something that licensees should avoid. Next subject that we've been asked a lot about is, can a licensee conduct a walkthrough? It's clear no. Pursuant to the most recent guidance from ESD, licensees cannot go to the property with your client or customer. We and NYSAR recommend buyers and sellers should speak with the attorneys about arranging a final walkthrough without the licensee being physically present. Again, you look at that legally necessary, and we can't construct any argument that a licensee's presence at a walkthrough would be legally required. You can, however, communicate with your client via phone, via video, any type of technology during that walkthrough. So you can still be available remotely, but you can't physically be there with the client for the walkthrough. Next subject, this one doesn't deal directly with the guidance from ESD, and this question's come up about whether licensees can make cold calls. And this, again, this arises from a different area of the law, but the governor, as everybody knows, declared a state of emergency back in March due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And because of that state of emergency, unsolicited calls to New York residents are now prohibited until September 7th, unless the state of emergency is lifted sooner. And the reason for that is New York's do not call registry law was recently amended. I believe it was towards the end of last year. And under that, unsolicited telemarketing calls to any person in New York are illegal when there's a declared state of emergency. It's not clear whether telephone calls would also include text messages. There hasn't been any guidance or court decisions on that subject as it relates to this amended law, which again, it was just amended last year, but under certain federal laws that relate to telephone calls, text messages, courts have found fall within the scope of those laws. So it's our advice that you should avoid making any unsolicited telemarketing calls and text messages to any person within New York until this state of emergency is lifted. So that leads to another question. What other marketing can a licensee do during this pandemic? All other types of marketing, mailers, billboards, social media, internet, that's all allowed. It's permitted. You can continue in that respect. And further, NYSAR is advising you can call an for sale by owner if you have an identifiable purchaser interested in that property. However, the cold call restriction would prohibit you from calling a for sale by owner to solicit that listing. NYSAR is also advising you can still perform business-to-business calls. The restriction, again, is on contacting individuals. So you can't cold call individuals, but if somebody has a business number, business-to-business calls are allowed. Also, email communications, those are still allowed. Emails do not fall within that text messaging and phone calls. However, you still need to be mindful and comply with any other relevant laws, CAN Spam Act, other laws that pertain specifically to email, and that would pertain whether or not there's a pandemic or not. Question also has come up frequently about closings and can closings take place? I've talked to many attorneys who yes, they've continued to creatively conduct closings, and closings can occur. And one big reason for that is remote notarization is now permissible under a separate executive order from Governor Cuomo, 202.7, which does really assist in closings being able to occur virtually. It's ultimately a decision of the lender, the seller's attorney, the buyer's attorney about whether a virtual closing can occur and whether remote notarization can be utilized. But we have to caution you that licensees should not be attending closings. There's really no legally necessary reason that we can think of why a licensee would need to attend a closing. The check can certainly be delivered via the mail. Post office is still running. Federal Express is still running. So as far as commission checks, although it would be great to get them as quickly as possible, our recommendation is you should strongly avoid attending any closings. If your office is closed, which Doreen made it clear in looking at the latest ESD that offices should not be open, real estate offices should not be open to the public, can you still pick up the mail or other items? ESD has made clear a single person attending a closed business can temporarily perform a task so long as they're not in contact with other people. So if you need to send somebody to the office to pick up that check, yes, you can send one person there to do it, provided that there is no in-person contact. But again, we strongly caution you to make sure that all safety disinfecting protocols are being complied with. So now what's the liability if a licensee violates the on-pause order? There's a couple of things that can happen. First is from a liability as to the state can issue penalties. That may range from a fine of $2,000. You can actually be charged with a misdemeanor, and there's the risk of license suspension or revocation. In addition, you have to give strong consideration that violating the on-pause order can relate or can result in civil liability, meaning that you can be subject to a lawsuit. There's been discussion already out there in the legal world that the plaintiff's bar may be looking at COVID-related cases. So somebody who contracts COVID through a third party who violated a governmental order, that there could be potential liability for that. So it's another area that you have to think twice about before you would even consider doing anything that would violate any of these governmental orders. Complaints can be made against violators. There's a couple of methods that complaints can be made. The first is to file a complaint with the Attorney General. There is no specific complaint form, but we do have the phone number here. And again, these numbers, this whole presentation will be available on the COVID Information Hub, so you can go back and get the phone numbers, any of the links that we have here. The second way a complaint can be made is filing through the Department of State. They do provide a link for complaints to be made. And the third way is a complaint, again, under the NAR Code of Ethics, that if a licensee is a member of a realtor organization, a complaint can be made against them. Complaints can only be made against individuals, not against firms or brokerages, but complaints can name the principal broker as well as the individual licensee. And the nature of those complaints can possibly be under Article 1, failure to treat people or parties honestly, and Article 3 in terms of a violation of the duty to cooperate. If a licensee is taking advantage of or violating the law and not cooperating with other licensees, again, that's potential liability under the Code of Ethics. So at this point, I'm going to kick it back to Doreen. We're going to switch or change gears. We're going to talk a little bit about the financial relief that is available to realtors under both federal and state programs. And Doreen's going to begin, and then I'll pick up where she leaves off.
Okay, hi everyone again. I'm sure at this point now, everyone has either read or heard on the television about all of the different loans that are available for small businesses. There's a little bit more information, well, there's a lot more information on the LIBOR's hub in regard to all of these SBA, Small Business Administration loans. So for more particular information, I would suggest that you go to our hub and to look up the information that we have there. But right now, I would like to cover generally the PPP program, or the Paycheck Protection Program, that's available out there as a loan for you right now. And it's eligible for businesses that have 500 employees or less. You could also apply for the PPP loan if you're a sole proprietor, self-employed individual, and yes, independent contractors also. Now, the purpose of the loan is to keep the workforce employed by making money available for payroll. So the loan is to be used to pay for payroll costs, rent, utility, and mortgage interest. The details of the loan, I mean, the benefit, the really wonderful thing about this loan, it includes partial loan forgiveness. So if 75% of the money of that loan is spent on payroll, and then the rest of it, the 25% is spent on rent, utilities, and mortgage interest for any 8-week period of time from February 15th through June 30th, that portion of the loan can be forgiven. And then there are other details of the loan. I mean, you could borrow up to $10 million for the loan. The interest rate can't go up from more than 4%. And there are also, no lender or borrower fees. That has all been waived on these. And personal guarantees are not required also. Now, filing for the PPP loan has already started. It's already open. So if you have not done so right now, please apply as soon as you can. And I know I've been hearing some feedback that it's not that easy. Some banks, they're going to some banks, and some banks offer it, other banks don't. Some of the lending institutions are not clear on it. You know what? This is a learning period for all of us. It's a learning period also for the banks. But in order to get the PPP loan, you have to go to a participating SBA lender or bank. And you should act as soon as you can if you haven't applied for the loan yet. And I'm sure as time goes on, days go on, weeks go on, these lending institutions are going to get more comfortable and more efficient in learning how to answer and what your questions in regard to applying for the loans, and that the money will be forthcoming. Now, hey, today's April 15th, today's tax day, right? And I'm sure you've all heard by now, but I did wanted to mention it also, that tax deadline, the tax day, has been extended to July 15th this year. There's also been an eviction moratorium for a 90-day period, and it ends on June 18th, where a landlord cannot evict a tenant for non-payment of rent. But anything beyond that, we don't have the answers to. Does that mean that the tenants do not have to pay the rent? The rent is forgiven? I don't believe so. It depends on what the landlords are going to decide after that moratorium expires. Can the landlords then take the tenants? Can they evict them? Can they take the tenants to court for back payment of the rent? There are a lot of unanswered questions right now in regard to that. But we just know for this period of time that the landlord cannot evict the tenant. There's also been a mortgage forbearance, and you may have heard about this too, and that's for a 90-day period. The real important thing about this is that forbearance does not mean forgiveness. You cannot just stop making your mortgage payments now and just not pay. You have to go to your bank and you have to make an arrangement with them. You have to have a dialogue with them in regard to what this means. And it's only really for government-backed loans in any event. but you have to work out the details of this forbearance with your mortgage lender. Because if you don't, and you stop making the mortgage payments, when that forbearance is over, the next day, your mortgage company could say you owe the whole amount right now, and if not, you're in default. So you want to have a conversation with them in regard to, well, this amount of money that you're not paying right now, could we tack it on the end of the mortgage? Can we have some type of a payment plan or payment schedule? And there may be other options out there. So you need to talk to your lender about it and not just stop paying. Now I'd like to turn it over to Patrick at this point. Thank you.
All right. Thanks again, Doreen. So I'm going to now talk about the second loan program that's available from the SBA, and that's the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, also known as EIDL. Doreen and I did a presentation on these. It's available on the COVID Hub, both loans. So to get more information, you can certainly go there or go to the SBA website. But real quickly, EIDL loans are available for small businesses that have suffered economic harm due to the COVID pandemic, small businesses with less than 500 employees, and that includes sole proprietors and independent contractors. Are eligible for these loans. And the great thing about them is that applicants can receive up to a $10,000 advance if they are found to be eligible for the loan. I say up to. I was just listening this morning, Newsday had a webinar with two officials, the actual head of the Long Island SBA office, and they went through, and I believe it's on the website if anybody wants to check it out. They went through about 45 minutes of Q&As about EIDL and PPP loans, and a couple of times they noted it is up to $10,000. It's not automatic that everybody gets $10,000, but they did, good news was they said money has already started to go out on these. So you can receive up to a $10,000 advance, and this advance is forgiven, and applicants can get it even if they don't qualify for individual funds. Or additional funds. So as long as you're eligible for the loan, you have the opportunity to get $10,000. So they say there's no such thing as free lunch. This is pretty close to it. And it's something that I think everybody should strongly investigate to the extent that you qualify. You can use it for paid sick leave, maintaining payroll, increased costs, rent and mortgage payments, repaying debt obligations. You can get up to $2 million. Loans under $200,000 don't require any personal guarantee. And this is administered directly through the SBA. You just go to the SBA website, sba.gov/disaster. You complete an application there. There's no bank involvement. One thing that cautioning you for this and really everything else, beware of scams. We've heard a lot through other attorneys, but also I've heard from people involved in some of the local chambers of commerce that unfortunately times like this bring out the best and the worst in people. And there are some third-party organizations who are not SBA approved lenders, have nothing to do with the SBA, that have tried to prey on businesses to get financial information. The SBA is not going to contact you directly if you don't have an application pending. So really just make sure you're dealing with credible parties. When it comes to PPP, recommendation is to go to your current lender. If they're not a SBA approved lender, ask them to recommend one, or go to the SBA website. They mentioned today on the webinar through the SBA that the website, if you put in your zip code, they will give you a list of approved SBA lenders for the PPP. Another point that was made, I've heard a couple times, but people have gotten this one wrong. You can apply for both the PPP and EIDL loan. You just need to put them towards different expenses. So the PPP can be used for payroll, and the EIDL can be used for more long-term expenses, such as equipment purchases, long-term debt. There's certainly no prohibition on applying for both. The other recommendation that we have, and I've heard NAR make the same recommendation, just make sure you keep very good records of the expense payments so that you can show that you've differentiated them and payments aren't being used for the same activity. Next subject I want to cover, and I'm going to cover this pretty briefly. There's so much out there on the pandemic unemployment assistance. You can get information on the Department of Labor website, but the CARES Act has added pandemic unemployment insurance to provide benefits for independent contractors and self-employed individuals. So I know that will apply to many people who are listening out there who wouldn't ordinarily be eligible for unemployment. This was created under the CARES Act, so most real estate salespeople who were not otherwise eligible for unemployment may be eligible for this pandemic unemployment assistance. The fact that ESD has said that certain real estate functions can continue remotely without independent in-person contact, that doesn't negate your ability to apply for pandemic unemployment assistance. So the test isn't whether you're theoretically able to work, the test is whether you're practically able to work. So if you don't have listings, you don't have people calling you about listings, and you don't have closings and compensation coming in, practically you should meet the test for eligibility for pandemic unemployment assistance. And it's certainly something that you should explore applying for. The application can be found at labor.ny.gov. It's my understanding that as of Friday, the state had updated the process and that things seem to be moving a little bit better. At least that's what the reports are out there. Next thing most of you probably are aware of, and hopefully some people have already received it, the economic stimulus payments. Most Americans are eligible for this. It's $1,200 for individuals, $2,400 for married couples, and an extra $500 for children and dependents that you have under the age of 18. There is a phase out for individuals earning more than $75,000 and joint returns over $150,000. You gradually phase out and wouldn't be eligible for the stimulus checks. Apparently checks were started to be direct deposited last week on Friday. And I read yesterday that many more people should start seeing the money in their accounts today. If the IRS doesn't have your banking information from direct deposits, it will mail your check to the address that was on your most recent tax return. And a piece of advice, you should, if you need to, update your address on the IRS website. Don't use any third parties to update your address. If you have an outdated address, you've moved, go to the IRS website and update it there. Really quick, 2 tax credits that may be available. These are more for businesses. The Family First Coronavirus Response Act, that provides small and mid-sized employers tax credits that if you provided paid sick leave to employees who had COVID or that had family members who had COVID and they needed to take a leave, there is tax credits that are available for that. In addition, CARES Act created the Employee Retention Credit. That was designed to encourage businesses to keep employees on the payroll. And this is a refundable tax credit that under certain circumstances can be given to businesses who kept their employees employed during the pandemic. One other point that hasn't been reported that much, but the CARES Act also increased the dollar amount you can withdraw from your own 401k from $50,000 to $100,000. And it also eliminated the penalty for those under 59 and a half who take a distribution. As with all of these, this item in particular, but all of them that we've reviewed, you should definitely contact your financial advisor and review the pros and cons of all of these benefits. I was on another webinar yesterday there was accountants, and they said they were trying to answer individual questions, and they said you really have to put pen to paper for your individual circumstances to understand what works best for you. So you really need to have a focused and detailed discussion with your own tax and financial advisor to review your own particular circumstances. So with that, Doreen and I are done, and I think I'm going to turn it over to Matt to the extent that there are some questions that people have out there.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Doreen. We do have a few questions. Doreen, if you'd be so kind as to just review the showings. There's a lot of questions on showings for vacant homes. So maybe we could just review those. There's still some questions on what can be done and what cannot be done with showings.
Okay, well, there should be no in-person showings. I mean, that we know. We cannot have person-to-person contact. Nor, however, on their website, their position is that if a licensee wanted to go to the homeowner's house to conduct a virtual show and walk around, walk around the house with the camera and show all of the different features of the house, that a licensee can do that as long as the homeowners leave the premises. Now, NYSOR said that they had a conversation with the ESD who agreed that that would be permissible. However, like I said earlier, the ESD said they were going to put these answers in writing and these do's and don'ts and what's permissible and what isn't. And to date, we have not received anything. One thing that sparked my interest is when I was having the conversation with NYSOR, they said that even though the ESD said that the licensee can go to the house, right, as long as the homeowner leaves the premises during the showing, that, and I guess this would apply to a vacant too, right, that there's nobody there, there's nobody in the house. The ESD, interestingly, however, said that if the licensee was questioned about why they did it and whether or not they violated the guidance, it's the burden is placed onto the licensee to show that the licensee has tried every other remote possibility before actually having to go to the house. So, what does that really mean? What does that mean? That the licensee bears this burden. The licensee will have to say, I tried to do it remotely and I couldn't because of X, Y, and Z. We tried to, I'm not sure. And that is my concern. I am not sure. How is the licensee going to show that they've exhausted every other effort to do this showing virtually or not before they go and do the showing virtually? So that concerned me a little bit. And because of that, I go back once again to what their latest guidance is, where it says all transactions must be conducted remotely. So if you go to the vacant house, you go to the house and the homeowners leave, and you do the showing like that, I just want you to be aware that there's a potential level of risk, in my opinion, for doing that. And then think about it. If you think it through, right? You go to the homeowner's house. You're going to have to use, right, all protective gear. You go facial. You can't, there can't be any person-to-person contact. You're touching things when you're there, when you're leaving. Even when you go to the vacant house, what are you touching? You're touching the doorknobs. Are you washing everything down? Are you disinfecting everything down? I mean, think of it on the practical level too.
Thank you, Doreen. Thank you. Patrick, this might be geared towards you. Do sole proprietors qualify even though they have no payroll since all agents are 1099?
Do they qualify for the unemployment insurance?
The pandemic or even the pandemic unemployment insurance.
Yes. So even if your own corporation pays you, let's say you're a sole proprietor, you're an S corp, you're being paid by your own corporation, you are still considered self-employed. That you can apply for pandemic unemployment assistance. The one, and this is on NYSAR, I will say NYSAR has a very good FAQ that covers a lot of specific questions related to different circumstances that people may be in as it relates to the pandemic unemployment assistance. But one thing that they mention is, to the extent that you have your own business and then you do make payments to yourself during this pandemic, that would qualify then as income, and you couldn't then self-certify that you're unable to work. So if you are self-employed through your own corporation and you haven't had any income or any profits, yes, then you should be eligible to apply for pandemic unemployment assistance.
Thank you. And that would be the same, and they can apply for pandemic unemployment and the PPP, both? If they're independent?
Yeah, no, that you probably, that's addressed on NYSAR's website as well. I know their concern is you might not be able to apply for both, because if you think about it logically, the PPP is supposed to replace income that somebody would not otherwise be getting. So you'd be double dipping in that respect. You can't double dip. So for instance, let's say you had employees, say you own the business, you have employees, you're paying those employees using PPP, you take a PPP loan. Those individuals now, they're getting income. They can't claim unemployment. However, if the employer doesn't take PPP, then those individual employees should be able to apply for unemployment. So you'd have to think about it the same way. If I am the only employee or the sole proprietor, and I'm getting PPP to pay myself, and that's a forgivable loan that if you use it for employment purposes, I have income then. I shouldn't need to apply for unemployment, and I wouldn't be able to certify that I have no income coming in. You can, though, take the EIDL loan. It's been reported you can apply for EIDL and pandemic unemployment assistance. The EIDL loan can be used for other purposes, so unrelated to income. So business expenses that you might have that you can't otherwise meet as a result of the pandemic.
Now, if they don't have a business account, they don't have set up a business account, for instance, Chase, for example, will not give an application unless there is a business account. Is there another way they can do it?
For the PPP loan? Yeah.
Correct.
Now, so they asked this question. I mentioned that Newsday webinar that was this morning. The SBA website has a page, and we could probably find that afterwards and put it out on our information hub, that you can search for SBA approved lenders. I would also recommend that if Chase says we can't do it, ask Chase for a recommendation. The one thing I'd caution about is going and just doing a Google search and seeing what you come up with, or taking like a third party that reaches out to you that you have no prior business relationship with. Those situations would be risky to me, because there are, again, there's been reported scams out there, and I wouldn't want to see anybody fall prey to that.
Thank you. Thank you.
And also, excuse me, and also I read that the SBA is expanding the list of lenders that they're allowing to provide the PPP loans to. So each day it's getting larger and larger. So if you do go to one like the Chase and they say, well, you're not a customer, I'm not going to give you the loan, there'll be other ones out there you could go to.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for clarifying. Now, I know NYSAR put out a hold harmless agreement. Does that protect the agents individually or the brokerages?
Actually, we had a call with all of the attorneys last night in regard to the hold harmless. The consensus at that point in time, even with the NYSAR attorney, is that they're going to be presenting a more of a disclosure form that could be used by the agents and the brokers. So there's going to be more information on that coming.
Okay, thank you. I have some closing questions. If a buyer or seller does not wish to close remotely, can they refuse to close?
That's going to depend on what's in the contract. I mean, I think that's really a contract specific question that would have to be posed to the attorneys handling the transaction. I know attorneys have been handling it in a variety of ways. I mean, I haven't seen any contract pre-COVID-19 that had some kind of exception that would allow for a delay or a termination of the agreement as a result of COVID. But practically, there's been instances where people either can't or don't want to close. And in those circumstances, my understanding in talking to other attorneys in the field is that they've really tried to work them out on a case-by-case basis. But from a contractual standpoint, most deals, at least the ones that were in place prior to all this happening, didn't have any mechanism to suspend or terminate the contract due to the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that you could think of is if, of course, the mortgage contingency clause, and then somebody lost their job or they weren't able to then get the mortgage, that could be
Right.
one consideration.
Okay. Pre-COVID closings don't affect things that are closing now. Those won't affect any pandemic unemployment or PPP?
That's a good question, Matt. I mean, it really might depend. There's not been any guidance. And again, as Doreen said from the beginning, these concepts are all brand new. So the idea that pandemic unemployment or that an independent contractor could even get unemployment, it was a foreign concept until a few weeks ago. So there's no guidance on how the state or the federal government are going to treat, let's say, commissions that may have been earned from a closing that happened pre-pandemic. But I would think just logically that that would be treated as compensation, and it may affect the weekly benefit that somebody can or cannot get. I think NYSAR actually had something. Yeah, NYSAR's advice on this was we can't be sure of the differing impact of earning commissions versus receiving payment of the commissions, but benefits may be reduced based on the fact that you did actually receive a commission. But their advice, and I agree with it, is that you should still apply for the pandemic unemployment assistance, have records of what compensation, if any, that you've earned. I think that it was advice I've heard a couple of times. You're not going to get anything if you don't apply. Obviously, you have to be honest and certify what you've made. But to the extent you just sit there and don't apply, you're not going to get anything. I know it sounds just common sense, but it's really, again, if there's a possibility of you qualifying and you provide all the honest information, I don't see why people shouldn't be at least making the application.
And just real quick, the S corporations, they can file for pandemic unemployment?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Go ahead. So
No, you can go, Doreen. Oh, yeah. No, I think, yeah, no, they can, if you're applying as a self-employed individual through an S corp. Yes, you can.
Okay.
And that goes too for the SBA loans as well.
Now, some folks have licenses in two areas. Independent contracts work for two different companies. Can they file under both licenses or both companies, or just under one?
I know NYSAR had a question on that, and their response is that for EIDL, it's not clear. It hasn't been clear. It does appear that for an EIDL loan that you could apply under both companies, given that there may be separate expenses as to each. But as far as PPP, and pandemic unemployment assistance. Those are to the individual, and you could only file one application. That's on the NYSAR FAQ. So I mean, with respect to pandemic unemployment, that's an individual, based on an individual level. So you would have to report all income together. So if you're able to earn income that is below or above the threshold from one job, even though you're not earning from the second, you can't just say, well, I normally get 2 incomes, so I'm going to apply for unemployment for one. You have to group them together and make one application.
Okay. We have some agent-owned properties out there, some new constructions. They're still licensed. Can the agent, if it's owned by the agent, still, how can it be showed? What do you recommend if they own the property themselves? Same for showings?
Well, you're saying the agent owns the
Yeah, we have an
property.
agent that is building a new construction house. Some of the agents have their own investments and they're selling the property. They're still licensed, but how do they show their own new construction
Well,
if they're the actual agent building it?
If it's their own property, I mean, once again, you go back to it being virtual, remote showing. They own the property. They have the right to be in the property. It would almost be the same as having the homeowner, right? Go walk through the house, with their phone and the Zoom, and walk around and show all of the different areas of the house. So as long as it's done remotely, there's no person-to-person contact. They're not having the potential buyers come to the property, because they are still an agent. They're still the broker. So they're still obligated to go by this new ESD guidance that's out. So I would say that it should be done remotely.
Okay. And just with final walkthroughs and home inspections, I'll make those our 2 last questions. I know we're running short on time. Let's take the home inspection question first. If you could recap that.
Oh,
Okay, sorry, yeah, the home inspector, again, it's almost like what we said before about having an appraisal go. The NYSAR once again said that the licensee is able to allow the home inspector into the property as long as person-to-person contact is minimized. But once again, I have to go back to that caveat, and what the ESD said about it is that first the licensee would have to exhaust every other remedy that they tried to do, a virtual, have the home inspector, go in there without having the licensee involved, without there being person-to-person contact. All of these things must be done remotely, right? That's what this guidance is saying. So if the licensee is then called to explain why wasn't this able to be done remotely? What, if anything, did you do to try to get the home inspector, this home inspection conducted in a virtual or a remote manner? The licensee would have to be able to explain that. I mean, can the home inspection be done remotely? I mean, that's a question. I know it's frustrating. I know you want specific answers, but without specific answers from the ESD telling the agents what they can and cannot do, everything else is really just a guess.
Okay, thank you, Doreen. I think we are, let me just see if I got another question outside the ones we asked. The photographer we already talked about is not essential. Seeing here. I think that's all of our questions that we have. Let me just make sure. In general, would there be insurance coverage for a claim that a licensee's business activities contributed to someone contracting COVID-19?
You know, whether these types of things are most likely not covered under your insurance policy. However, I would advise you to contact your insurance carrier to ask specifically whether or not something like this would be covered. But generally, I would say it would not be.
Okay. All right, thank you both for your time today. And I know all this information will be available at lirealtor.com, and you can go under the COVID-19 hub. And I want to thank everybody that joined us today. Will be this information, this slideshow will be available to the members. Tessa, do I have you back on?
Yes, sir.
All right. And I just want everybody, I want you all to be safe, practice patience. Any questions, certainly if they're not answered on our lirealtor.com, you can always email us or email your Chief Executive Officer, Tessa, and we'll certainly get through this together. And we'll be keeping you up to date on more information as we get it from the state and from ESD. Thank you all. Be safe and have a great day.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you, everyone.